Good afternoon and welcome to the Masters University webinar on Biological and Physical Sciences. My name is Vanessa Haynes and I'm the Admissions Event Manager here at TMU. Thank you to everyone joining us today. We appreciate the opportunity to host you and invite you to participate in the Q&A later in the session. At that time, we'll open the discussion and answer any questions you may have. The Q&A box can be found at the bottom middle of your screen. Just a few logistical items before we begin. Please note that your camera and microphone will be turned off during the session. We thank you in advance for your patience as we try to make best use of our technology. If you do get disconnected during the call, please go ahead and log back in using the original link included in your confirmation email. Lastly, know that we are recording the session and will make it available to you as soon as possible. Well, today we're privileged to have with us Dr. Mitch Hopewell and Dr. Joe Francis. The topic today is COVID-19, coronavirus, and creation virology. They also provide an overview of our undergraduate science degrees. Dr. Mitch Hopewell is Interim Provost and Dean of Online Learning. Dr. Hopewell oversees academics at TMU as well as our online programming. Dr. Francis is Chairperson of our Biological and Physical Sciences Department and Dean of School of Science, Mathematics, Technology, and Health. Dr. Francis is also Professor of our Biology Department and teaches a number of classes, including Immunology, Essentials of Biology, and other pre-med courses. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We're eager to hear from you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Welcome, Dr. Francis. I'm glad you could join us today. And you and I have had a few conversations along the way, and I'm just really excited to get into some coronavirus stuff and learn more about you and your work and share some information with our viewers today. So let me just jump right into it. You had written an article for the Answers in Genesis magazine. I believe they published it on their webpage and got a lot of traction. It was very popular. And so I wonder if maybe you could just introduce yourself, your work, and just speak quickly about the article and some of the things you presented there.
Okay, well, I traveled with the basketball team in 1 year, and my first name is Joe, so they call me Dr. J. And he was a famous basketball player. But I do teach medical microbiology also, and in medical microbiology, we talk about viruses. But I have the privilege of working with faculty, and I can't tell you, I've been at 3 Christian colleges and love them all, but we have some of the greatest teaching here. I found that out 20 years ago when I thought I was a good teacher and came to TMU and found out that I had a lot to learn from the faculty at this place. And of course, our students. We love our students. We've been praying for them every day. We're online, but we have meetings with them. And you know what? They really appreciate the prayer time. And so it's great for believers. It's a great example of how believers can come together and find hope in our common cause of the Savior, and then find strength to help our neighbors during this difficult time.
Yeah, let's see. Absolutely. So, Dr. Francis, why don't you just, could you summarize your article for us as we are all, kind of thinking about coronavirus and thinking about different viruses and just getting some of us coming up to speed and understanding what that is in general. I just wonder if you could just bring us up to speed with some of the things you had talked about in your article.
Sure. I was asked to write that article, and during the week we were trying to evacuate and leave campus, and it was a tough thing to do, but I thought, you know what, the articles I'm seeing out there, I don't see a lot of people talking about the basics. What is a virus, and what do they do, and why are they here, and why, even the question of natural evil, why would God make such a thing that would cause illness? And so in biology and in the area of creation biology, we use biblical principles to study biology. And so we know that God made a world without illness, a world without death. And he made everything before the fall of man, before death and disease came on the scene. So when you look at viruses, they were here. They show design. You could argue that maybe they're a broken piece of something at the fall, but when I look at them, they are they show design. They show a handiwork of a designer. So we went into the basics of what a virus is. A virus is basically a biological organism that, first of all, is dead. it cannot reproduce by itself. It's considered by most biologists not even to be alive. But it is the most common, it is the most numerous biological creature on this earth. We know that for absolute, we're confident of that prediction because the most common creature that we call living, okay, is a bacteria. And they're everywhere, and there's estimated to be 10 to 30 million species of bacteria on Earth. And so what does that have to do with viruses? Well, every bacteria on Earth is infected with a virus. I can show you with a PowerPoint slide, Dr. Hopewell, an analog PowerPoint slide, what one of these viruses looks like that actually infects bacteria. Let's see if you can see it. Is it too washed out there?
Nope, I think so. I think we can see that.
Okay, that's a bacteriophage virus that we call it a bacteriophage because it invades bacteria. And you see it has a head group with 20 protein faces on it. Every one of those proteins is different. It has an injection port called a tail. And that tail is actually made so that it is, okay, think of a spring for a minute. When you pull a spring apart, what happens? It closes. That tail on that bacteriophage is spring loaded. So when you see the tail fibers there, this was actually called the lander based on the moon, some of the moon landing vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Those tail fibers or legs actually can bind to the surface. And when they do, when they get a good binding, that tail contracts, injecting a needle into the cell, and then makes copies of itself inside the bacteria. So we don't think that's an accident. We don't think that came about by chance events. That looks like design. And then when you look at what these viruses are doing, so the most numerous virus on Earth, the most numerous creature on Earth are viruses. And the most numerous viruses are in bacteria. What are they doing? And what we find them doing is controlling their population. Because I developed a theory about 12 years ago that addressed the question of what are bacteria doing here? And most of those creatures don't cause disease. They're actually recycling nutrients on Earth. They're recycling carbon, lead, water. If we could all go up to Mammoth right now and go skiing, which we can't do, they have bags of this stuff that they shoot out of their snowmaking machines that have bacteria in it, because bacteria actually help make it rain. And so what we find is that 99.9999% of bacteria on Earth are recycling nutrients for life. So I called this theory the biomatrix theory. But I had to figure out, what are these viruses doing? Well, it looks like they control the population of the bacteria and even sometimes help them out. So the most numerous creature on Earth are viruses, and they are doing beneficial things for life on Earth. And I always think about what God says about how he operates in this world. And sometimes he talks about the weak and the small and how he uses them. And it just reminds me of his goodness. Now, it's frustrating to some people, and even myself, to talk about goodness at a time like this in a virus. And so we do know that some of them do cause disease. But here's what's interesting. Of the viruses that cause illness in human, we only know of about 200. So we're talking about 30 million species of viruses out there, and only 200 that cause illness in human. And if you look at the ones that have caused pandemics, it might be less than 2 dozen. So it raises the question, where did these viruses come from? Maybe they did, well, maybe we shouldn't say maybe. We know from this creation idea, they probably had a good role. And now they're perhaps in the wrong place. So I developed a theory called the displacement theory that, and it kind of goes back to the idea of God in the garden saying, Adam, you're going to have trouble in the garden. You're going to work. There's going to be sweat on your brow because I allowed the thistles and thorns to come forth. Now, wait a minute. This is after the fall. Creation's done. those thistles and thorns are already there in creation week. And when I look at my bird feeder, I can buy some thistle seed and I can see those birds benefiting from that. But if I put those thistle seeds with their outer shell into my hand, it hurts. It hurts. It's like they're in the wrong place. So I developed this displacement idea. So and what's really, really fascinating here, what's really fascinating is that about of those 200 viruses that infect us, 2/3 are found in animals.
Mm-hmm.
Of those virus classes that really cause severe illness, I'm estimating 96% of them are found in animals. So the theory would be, and this is only a theory, you've got to be careful in science, okay? I know scripture to be true. That's where my foundation is. Science is fallible. But I'm going to make a prediction and say that those viruses that cause disease in us were doing something good somewhere else, perhaps in an animal, and now they're displaced.
Okay.
The thistles and thorns have come into our environment. God never intended that. Now, the scripture also talks about him chastening his people after the fall, even with illness. But he didn't intend in the beginning for those viruses, I believe, to cause illness, because I can say that with confidence, because we don't see a historical Genesis account including disease or illness before the fall.
Okay. One of the phrases we've been using that's really helpful and very interesting. One of the phrases that we hear in the news, and this coming up, and probably people start reading about this in January, maybe if you're really paying attention in December or sooner. But this has been termed the novel coronavirus. Okay, so talk to me about that. What does that mean? Novel means new. This is a new coronavirus. Talk to me about that.
Right. We've known about coronaviruses for a fairly long time, because 5 or 6 of their species. So coronavirus, we're talking about a family of viruses now. And so 5 or 6 of their strains or species cause illness in humans, and all of those strains are slightly different. So in 2000, 2003, 2004, a really serious infection broke out called SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and it was a killer. It started to go pandemic, and its name was really COV1. And it looks like, though, what happened, then it disappeared. It disappeared. It was found in an animal in a marketplace also, and then it disappeared. And then this virus showed up, and I started looking at its DNA and its proteins, and it had some similarities to this COV1. So they called this virus COV2. But it's different. It's different from the COV1 virus. So it's got some novelties. So I think they wanted to make sure they distinguished this virus from COV1. So because they're different enough in the illness in the severity of illness they cause. So they called it a novel coronavirus, and probably its mixing in an animal caused it to possibly change. Now here's why we think that we could happen, because it happens in the flu virus. And the second thing is the good news for us is COV2 is not mutating very fast. It actually protects its DNA from mutation. There's another design, pretty amazing. It protects its DNA from mutation. So something might have happened in an animal vector. We call that a vector. As when we get something from an animal, we call the animal a vector. Perhaps COV1 or another coronavirus went into an animal, and we know that viruses can trade their DNA. And so perhaps some gene trading went on, and this new virus came forth. And so that's part of why we call it the novel coronavirus.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the genes, and I know that we've been reading some things about taking this virus and genome mapping it, looking at the genome. So talk to us about that. Has this coronavirus been has it been mapped? What can we know about it? What is that telling us?
Yes, it's mapped, meaning its entire DNA sequence is known. And from that sequence, we know that we can determine how many proteins it has. And get this, it only has 27 proteins.
Hmm.
In humans, we have 21,000 proteins, making it's really a miracle of life that they run our bodies, they run our cells. But that takes a lot of proteins. There's only 27 proteins, and they're all mapped as far as what kind of protein they are based on what we see in the COV1 virus and some other viruses. So you can go online right now, anyone can grab that DNA sequence, search databases, and look at it. But we've got a pretty good handle. This is what's, I want to give some encouragement here. From that DNA analysis, which we call data science, or sometimes big data science, from that DNA analysis, we have determined where the proteins are. And it's proteins on the surface of a virus that tend to cause the problems.
Okay.
The two things that a virus does, it makes proteins that can turn our immune system off or turn them on. The second thing is the proteins allow the virus to go inside cells, and they multiply out of control, so to speak. And in some cases, they can burst the cell. In the case of the coronavirus, they push themselves out. They actually bud out, and that's eventually going to kill the cell. That's all directed by proteins. It's all directed by these 27 proteins. And the only reason we're getting a handle on those proteins is from the DNA that holds the sequence for those proteins. And here's what's exciting. There are some new developments based on how we can stop those proteins. And we're going to hear more about that in the news.
Okay. Speaking of the news, there's a lot that we see people sharing articles and stories, and there's news briefings. We see doctors and Dr. Fauci and others that are on the news. As we're reading these things, what are some tips or some things that you can help us as we filter that and we think through, what should we be reading and listening to?
Yes, there's information overload. Becky and my wife, we watch the updates every afternoon with the president, and we're so glad that he's active and our government is active. But there's a lot of data and even conflicting information that comes out, and we have to know that each expert that's called on really can only comment in their own expertise. So physicians on the front line are seeing patients die, and they say this drug is working to help some of them. Okay, and then the PhD researchers in the labs are saying, well, I can't prove that unless I have more data. So some people might say, hey, this cure works over here, but a scientist might say, we don't have enough data, and that can be confusing. It can even be, disconcerting, saying, how do we not know? But again, this goes back to science. Science is a process. I think it's a gift from God, but it's fallible and it takes time. It takes time. Science works, but we have to do things carefully and take our time. So I think sometimes, especially with the cure, someone might say, hey, this cure is working right now. But some scientists have to say, I can't tell you for sure yet unless I do more analysis. And so we really got to cut some slack here for everyone and try to process the information based on the fact that people are working in their various fields, and they have their own limitations within those fields.
Well, Dr. Francis, I've appreciated working with you. I always enjoy talking to you because science is something I'm interested in, although I didn't pursue degrees in that field. And just appreciate working with you. You've been a part of co-leading our COVID-19 response team at the university, helping to advise us and as we've gone through this situation. And so that's been really beneficial. And through that process, you share stories about your students, you share stories about your research program, you share stories about patenting things through our science department. Fill me in on that. What are some of the exciting things that you're seeing in your department and some of the things your students are doing?
Yes, well, at our university, we're not as large as some other places, but we have been blessed to have a research program. And we started this 20 years ago, and we found out that this made our students more competitive in the marketplace, number one. And what medical schools were saying indirectly, what we figured out was that they're saying, you know, those students go into a laboratory and you tell them, here's the problem, please solve it, please work on it. That's one of the few times in our education process where the student is just not taking in information, but it's processing information and making discovery. And I don't know of anything more exciting than doing research in God's creation. And so we've had research done in genetics, for instance. Dr. Anderson, our biochemistry professor, his group has won 2 awards at a national meeting for their genetics work. And this is directly relevant to virus work because viruses are basically a piece of DNA with protein on them. You can see it's highly organized, but they don't have much more. The coronavirus has a little lipid membrane. So what we're excited about is students doing this kind of research and then possibly going into the lab next year in a graduate school and working on a virus, working on an illness, working on helping our physicians on the mission field and our physicians around the world. This is very exciting. So we won awards a few years ago. My students discovered a new antibiotic that had application in the industry, and it came about by an experiment that we didn't know how to interpret. We thought it was the wrong result. When we looked at it closer, we discovered a new antibiotic, and we wrote a patent. We wrote a patent for that discovery because it had application in industry. And so I'm pretty excited about how, especially, I'm grateful to our faculty who take time to do this, because it's a laborious process, because we can only do this with 1 or 2 or 3 students at a time, and the projects are in depth, and we have to put more time in than usual. So I'm indebted to our faculty, and I'm excited about our students who are going on to professional schools and medical schools with this background, and I'm excited to see their excitement about studying God's world in this way and making a new discovery. The word says, you know, that good things are hidden, hidden in Christ. Knowledge is hidden in Christ. And so he designed us to discover. He designed us to discover things. And I'm really excited about where we're going and what our students are doing.
Well, that's one of the things I really appreciate about you, Dr. Francis, and our other faculty, is that the context of each of your disciplines is always in the foundation of God's word, and that doesn't require a compromise of the science in your case, but rather explains it in the true context. And so, in a sense, the true scientists are those that operate from a biblical worldview. So, Vanessa, I could go on forever talking to Dr. Francis. I just enjoy my time with him whenever I get a chance. But I know we have some people that may have some questions. So, do you want to take it?
Yeah, we do have the Q&A. We'll just transition into that section. Actually, I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Hopewell, and I would invite the crowd, whoever is joined in on this call, please take this time to click on that Q&A bubble down below in the middle of your screen there, and type in any questions that you may have. We'd love to answer your questions and hear from you.
All right, Dr. Francis, we have one attendee labeled anonymous attendee. It says, do we have opportunities for involvement for our students in genetic engineering?
Yes. Yes. Again, in our biochemistry lab, they are taking a gene out of an organism and putting it in a bacteria to make a protein. That is genetic engineering. We are doing it. Now, that's very basic because we're basic engineering, but it still is they're learning the process. Yes. Now, at the same time, there's ethical concerns about how you do that and what kind of cells you do that on. Some genetic engineering could happen on a human embryo. We would be against that. We're using bacteria and those kinds of things, and we're using techniques that are approved and developed. But we can do that, but it has to be done carefully, and that's why we have faculty who are trained And that's why we also have an ethical framework that we work under also. So yes, it can be done, but it must be done carefully and wisely.
Okay, great. One question from James. He says, could it possibly be, I think the situation of understanding the coronavirus, for genetic rearrangement to give variation to genes? I wonder if I could pop that. James, I wonder if you could pop that question over into the Q&A window so that we can all see that there. In the meantime, while he's transferring that over, we have a couple questions, Dr. Francis, about the job market after graduation, either in pre-allied health or some of the jobs, the medical schools and that kind of thing. Could you address those?
Yeah, so we have a pre-medical, pre-health professions is the best way to say it, because we have students going into the health professions from our kinesiology department and from our biology department. So we have pre-med, pre-nursing, pre-PA. We have students going into veterinary medicine. So we have pre-vet. We have pre-pharmacy. We have students going on into pharmacy school. I think we just had 4 or 5 or 6 acceptances this year into medical schools, and some new medical schools like Liberty University, by the way. And we have students going into graduate school. We have one of our own graduates here working in the registrar's office, and he's been trained in data science. So he's taken biology and computer science and put those two together. And now we're looking at some of those hybrid programs. We're looking at pre-engineering. And I mentioned this term, big data or data science. We have students now working in data science at Microsoft and other places. And that's analyzing the data. Just because of computers, because we can store so much information, we can store a lot about the human body, but we just scratched the surface at that, looking at that data. You know, there could be a cure for coronavirus somewhere in the databases. Dr. Hopewell mentioned the DNA. That's what we're going to. And so data science, we're looking at geosciences, we're looking at geoengineering, environmental geoscience, and we're excited about those fields as well as the medical fields. And then we have students going in and getting their sports medicine degrees in sports medicine and practicing. And we're just blessed with, you know, one of our #1 applicants for our programs is pre-health professions. And to me, that's a huge blessing that our students are going out with the love of Christ into that field. And so I'm pretty excited about all these areas.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Philip had a question about going back to the intelligent design and displacement theory you mentioned earlier. His question is, has there been any research on the role that viruses have in animals and humans?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. We know that in bacteria, they're involved in recycling. We know that in plants, they have protected plants. So in plants, the chestnut tree was almost wiped out from the US in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was completely gone. Someone found a surviving chestnut tree. These are majestic trees. Think about Christmas and chestnuts. And they're wiped out. Someone found a surviving tree, and in it, it had a virus that was protecting the tree from a fungus that was killing all the trees. And I think we're going to find more of that because no one's really looking for that. So viruses that attack humans are called animal viruses, just because, yeah, that's what they're called, and not that many of them. But we've enumerated those because we've found them causing illness. But who's looking for those viruses in animals that aren't causing illness? No one's thought really to do that very well. So we need to do more of that. Now, let me give you one. It's the norovirus. The norovirus is this horrible virus that can make you sick on a ship cruise, and it transfers. It's highly transmissible. It's a gut flu. Goes 24 hours. I've had it. You don't want to even have it for 24 hours. Anyway, we've tracked that norovirus to mice, and we found out in the mice, it actually is not making them sick, but it helps their gut development as a fetus, a fetal mouse. And so I think we're going to find more and more of those things. So in the human genome, in our DNA, we have retrovirus DNA. Some people say, is that a virus or is that human DNA? Did we acquire this in the past or was it designed to be there? I'm thinking it's designed to be there. And what the retrovirus does, right in the connection between the mother and the baby, the placenta, it's highly expressed. These retrovirus genes are highly expressed. And what they do is they mute the mother's immune system toward the developing baby. And this is really interesting because the HIV virus is a retrovirus and it turns off the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So could it be that some of the viruses in human DNA and animal DNA came out of the DNA, got displaced, and started to leave the body, and maybe it was never intended to? So that fits the displacement model. So we need more of those examples. As a person who believes in creation and science, as a creation scientist, I believe we should look for viruses. I would predict there's going to be more in animals providing beneficial activities, being beneficial to the animal.
Okay. We have a couple questions just kind of about the classes at the Masters University. And of course, science is not easy. Otherwise, we'd be handing out science degrees all over the place. And so what are some of the challenges? What are some of the successes and some of the things that students are overcoming and facing in classes at the school? Do we have any clinical placements? What are some of the practical ways that students interact with science at the university?
So we now have a research program. We're starting to do, we have a science and math club, and they bring in speakers from the outside. And that's been a huge blessing from our local hospitals, from our medical students. And we've actually developed some partnerships with Liberty, and we're looking at some other partnerships for medical school. We've also, again, take these students to this national conference. It's a weekend in April. We're going to miss it this year, but they interact with others. They make poster presentations. And that's another way that we do that. We also counsel each of our own students. Every faculty member not only teaches, but helps their students through the process. We had a 4.0 student. Let me give you one more thing. Is we have Go teams, and our students go in the summer every other year, I believe, on a medical missions trip. And one of our graduates, Dr. Reisman, is in Togo in the Hospital of Hope. And he has an incredible story because he had a long road to get into Johns Hopkins, but he got in. But we had ways to try to counsel him and help him get into that medical program. But again, we're just blessed with our students, and it's not hard to think of ways to help them because we're a family and we want to be together and help them.
All right. Let's see. We have a lot of questions this time. I'm not sure exactly if we'll be able to get to all of them, but I just wanted to pick a few. Here's a really interesting one. James asked, he was wondering whether one of the purposes of viruses might be to create new variations in species.
That's really interesting. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Todd Wood, wrote a paper on that years ago in the creationist literature. And yes, we think they very well could be involved, but we don't have enough totally hard evidence. We do have something, rock wallabies in Australia, a cousin of the kangaroo, and their chromosome number is changing. Now, your chromosome number shouldn't change. As humans, we have 46 chromosomes, plus or minus one, because we have some individuals that have an extra one. We have some, but then that 46 number helps define who we are as humans. If you change it dramatically, you don't have human life. It can kill us if we're born with not enough chromosomes. So there's these rock wallabies, I think they have like 20 chromosomes, but it seemed to be speciating at the chromosome level. So there's some with 14 or 12 or 16. And a few years ago, someone looked at this and they found a retrovirus. And it could be a retrovirus in control of changing the chromosome number. But the problem was the rock wallabies kind of looked all the same. So was it really speciation? It certainly was chromosome change. We're as creationists, we think there was probably a lot of speciation after creation and after animals got off the ark. And if we have a whole field called baraminology. But we think today that a lot of that speciation within a cat kind or within a dog kind has stopped. But these, we call them elements, these genetic elements, and viruses are genetic elements, and there's more than just viruses that are genetic elements, could play a role in speciation within a created kind.
Speaking of just kind of building off of that, one of the other questions we have is that we have a student who's seeking a degree in marine biology, maybe a field or a career in marine biology, and he's just wondering about, and this is a great question, and I get this question from parents from time to time as well, is, if a student goes to the Master's University, and we approach science, all of our disciplines from a biblical worldview, how do departments, and specifically the science department, prepare students to interact with in graduate school or further studies with a world who doesn't have a biblical worldview? How do you work with students to reconcile those, or to not to reconcile necessarily, but to interact?
Sure. Well, the first thing we do is we use textbooks that other schools use. We have Christian-based textbooks and we have non-Christian-based textbooks. We teach all theories of origins, and we teach all of biology. We actually teach more because we teach a Christian view of biology with the nuts and bolts of the traditional biology. So it comes down to really the teaching resources we use and the fact that we are inclusive by teaching everything. And we look at all the models. There is data that can support evolution, but that some of that same data actually supports a fairly recent creation. It's interesting. I think creationists in the past might have not done a very good job to say, well, that view's all wrong, and then we throw out the data. But what we do is we look at all the data. We can look at all the data. Yes, we believe these other theories are incorrect compared to our belief in origins and creation, but we're inclusive in what we teach because we're going out into the world, in a world also where we need to communicate with our neighbors and understand what they believe. So in science, this is a natural place to do an integration of everything, okay, everything. We want students to know the philosophy of science as well as the basics of science and the details of science. And so I'm also excited about that opportunity we have too, to prepare students in that manner.
Very good. Just a few specific questions that we might be able to get to as well. Somebody had brought up the question again, going back to what you had mentioned earlier about, each person that we're hearing in the news is coming, whether they're a practitioner or whether they're a laboratory researcher or this kind of thing. Maybe just briefly summarize that again as it relates to how are people exploring possible cures to this in both at the front lines and as practitioners, and then also in the laboratory.
Yeah, I mean, we do have the frontline people using some of the drugs available, and thankfully it appears to be in certain instances they're working, and we're we want that to take place. As far as the laboratory scientists, there's one that I've been following, and his group is making they're genetically engineering an antibody. So we make antibodies after we're infected with a cold virus or flu or corona, it takes about 14 days and 7 to 14 days. And that can be a long time to wait if you have a life-threatening infection. We give vaccines to people to make those antibodies come out long before you get the illness. The problem is it takes a year to 18 months to make a new vaccine. Well, this engineer, he's an immunoengineer. He has found the genes for an antibody, a human antibody, and he has found the structure on the coronavirus that attaches to our cells, and he genetically engineered the binding site. So antibodies have these binding sites. They grab bacteria, they grab viruses. He has made the binding site pocket fit that coronavirus, and he's genetically engineered that into an antibody. Excuse me. So what he's forecasting is, and here's the interesting thing. This is biology, so he still has to put the genetically engineered sequence for the antibody in an organism, and he may, in the Ebola crisis, the same thing took place, and they put it in a tobacco plant because plants can make a lot of proteins fast, and we don't have internal organs to deal with from an animal. We just have green leaves, and we smush them up and get the juice out, and we have antibodies. So he's making a genetically engineered human antibody to coronavirus surface. He's going to put the gene in probably a tobacco plant. I haven't heard the final. And they're forecasting they might have something by September. We don't know, but that's what he's saying. And that's probably a year earlier than a vaccine could make it to the market. What I'm so excited about and thankful to God is that if that works, we can have a 1-2 process where people get these genetically engineered antibodies if they get sick in the fall, and then we could be vaccinated within 6 to 12 months later. So there are some exciting things happening in laboratories. Is it a possibility it might not work? Yes, the Ebola antibody did work, and then it didn't seem to work very well, and then they made new antibodies, put them all together, now they have a better treatment. And that's the way science often works, okay? It's a hit or miss. You try it, it works, it doesn't work so well later, you refine it. I am fairly confident that this is going to take place. It's not my direct field, I'm not working at that lab, but I'm excited about it.
Well, as we get here to the end of our time, I wonder if you might recommend maybe a few books to read for those who are considering coming and starting a degree program in biological sciences of some kind. Is there a creation science book that you found really accessible and helpful for people that you might recommend?
Well, there's one that is written by a Harvard-trained creationist, Dr. Kurt Wise. There's actually 2 of his I'd recommend. Faith, Form, and Time, which puts science in the perspective of the Bible. Listen, we got to tell people over and over, we don't start with science. We start with here's where he starts the book. Let me tell you why this is so important. Science is based on presuppositions, and one is that reality exists. Okay, the problem is that's a presupposition. Science cannot say reality exists. That's an idea in our mind that we see something firm here and it exists. They can't prove it. Genesis 1, Dr. Wise says in Genesis 1:1 in his book, it solves the problem. In Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. He tells us right away there is a physical reality. That is the foundation of science. That's one of the foundation presuppositions that the Bible is saying is true. And so that's why that book is so valuable. Another one of his is Devotional Biology, Understanding the Patterns of Life by Dr. Todd Wood. And I'm trying to think if some others will come to my mind here. But these are books written by creationists, again, who are saying, let's not throw out science. And let's not start with science. Let's start with the Bible. And let's look at science as a beautiful gift from God that allows us to do what we were created to do, to make discoveries. And in that way, solve problems and then worship the Creator.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. Francis. I know we have a few offline questions. Vanessa, I wonder if maybe we could clean those up as we go after the webinar. But just want to thank you again, Dr. Francis, and just tell you how much I appreciate your involvement with the university as we move through the current situation that we're facing, but then also the way that you invest in our students and work with our athletic teams, and you just have the tireless energy to serve our students, and so we thank you for that, and thank those that are here. So I'll pitch it back to Vanessa.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hopewell and Dr. Francis. It was good to hear from you. Thank you to our guests for joining us this afternoon. We do invite your questions. If you'd like to reach out to us and learn more about our departments, our academics, or life at TMU, please do that. Contact our admissions department. We'd love to hear from you. Well, that's it. That wraps up our session. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your week.